let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaining, fetishism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're joined by a special guest. Today we're welcoming to the show, we've got Ugo.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, just fine. How are you guys?
Doing good.
Yeah, doing good. We're really glad to have you on the show. You're someone who we've been interested in speaking to for a little time because, of course, we've had Pablo on the podcast previously. Listeners, you'll remember him from our culture ep, Life in Mexico. And we had the opportunity to talk a little bit about a wonderful product called El Gainer, which is a podcast slash website news platform directed towards the South American slash Spanish-speaking Latin gainer community, which Ugo, you're the mastermind and the creator behind. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I've been in this project like from 10 years now, and it have been like some of these things that you are proud of, you know. First discovered I was a gainer slash feeder. It was very hard to me, you know, like I didn't have a lot of information there. And that was my main thought about that. So that's why for me this website and this podcast is very important, you know, like it's reflecting that part of myself. And I was like lucky enough when I was younger, and I think about it every time I make a podcast or every time I write something in the website, you know. It's like, what kind of information should I have in my moment, you know, to avoid the feeling like a stranger, like I was like some kind of freak because of it, you know.
I feel like we all feel that way in the beginning.
It makes sense, you know. I think for so many of us, and, you know, obviously for Tim and myself, and I think many of our listeners, we grow up in, you know, white dominant, English speaking Western countries where we realistically have the greatest amount of access to other people in the community and, you know, the language and things that people talk about. You know, it is very centered on us, you know, and obviously that's why we said that we wanted to do, you know, episodes that focus on other countries and kind of bring in gainers and fetusists from all over the world. But I think what you're expressing really is important for people to be considerate of. As much as we can find it difficult with our English and our Western access to process gaining and find community, how much more difficult it can be for individuals like yourself in different parts of the world where there's less representation and things that aren't in Spanish. So I think it's so cool that you took that initiative to create something that was not just for yourself, but for other people like yourself who needed a voice and an opportunity to be heard. So just a moment here to applaud you for it, listeners at home. You better be applauding this beautiful man, because let me tell you, as the people right here who also do a podcast, because that's obviously, you know, that you're here listening to it, I can tell you that it's a labor of love. You know, this shit is hard. It takes time. So, you know, mad respect to someone who's doing all of that with language on top, with culture on top of that, with access on top of that. Ugo, hats off to you. And I think what you're doing is amazing.
Oh, thank you. I actually, you know, as you said, running this kind of project is really hard. You know, it takes a lot of your time, and sometimes when you're having like a rough time in your life, or, you know, struggling with the job and some other things, it's like really difficult to do it. But at the end of the day, it's really rewarding. You know, like, you know, how does it feel to be like feeling alienated because of this, because you can't find info, because you don't know what's going on with you. And then, it makes it worth it, like to know that there's some people there that is discovering this and they haven't the access to it, and they're not suffering the things I did, when I first began into this. So yeah, you're totally right. It's like it's a really hard to do thing, but it's really rewarding, at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So before we delve more into Gainer itself, I want to focus on you for a moment here. So, you said you've been doing the podcast for 10 years, but, you said before as well, you identify as a gainer and a feeder. Is that right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your gaining journey, kind of where you started, way back whenever that was, and just where you're up to now. Fill the listeners in on your journey.
Let me think about it. I think the first time I thought about being fat, I was really a little kid. I was like 10 years old, maybe. And of course, as it evolved, when I was a teenager, it started to have this like sexual connotation, So I started to have this idea of gaining weight by myself when I was about like, I don't know, 13 years old, maybe. And but it was just like I get hot with the idea. Maybe I masturbate to it or something like that, and that's it. Okay. But as the time passed by, I discovered it was more like an essential part of myself, And when I was about 19, I decided to actually gain the weight, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to like it, because I'm thinking of it like an idealization of it. And of course, it's not the same just thinking about it than living it, A lot of gainers that I know are not aware of, they are not aware of a lot of things that comes with the obesity, with gaining all the weight, They have this idea of everything is gonna be just perfect. And even if I was really young, I thought about it, and it was, screw it. I'm gonna leave this. And at the end of the day, if I feel like it's not for me, or something gets wrong, or I really don't like it, I just can't drop the weight. So I started to do it, and I went from 80 kilos, more or less, to 120, like in year and a half, maybe.
Wow, that's pretty incredible progress.
Yeah, and I loved it. I mean, I was like, I want more from this, what I discovered with this experiment was like, I really love to be fat, and I wanted more. In that time, I was like ending up high school and getting ready for the university and that stuff. So I decided to focus more in my career, because as hot as it was, I did have some trouble because of it, because I was so much into it. So sometimes I just neglected other parts of my life because of it, And I was pretty young. I didn't know how to actually, manage my life in that time. So I started to become someone who was just gaining centered, and that's not functional. So I decided to make a pause on it and focus on my career, and get keep going. So I slowly dropped the weight. I have a really fast metabolism. So if I'm not like actually doing something for my gains, I probably drop the weight, and that happens like, all the weight I gained like in a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I drop it in maybe the double of the time, but I ended up like being skinny again, And when I was in my last years of of the university, I discovered that I have a trouble with it. I was like, I feel like something is missing from myself. It's something here that makes me feel like I'm not totally me, and that's a really, really weird thing to feel. But I discovered it was because I was not fat enough. I didn't like myself enough because I was not fat enough, and that's difficult to discover. So by that time, there was more information about around the web, because when I was younger, I lived the web 1.0, and things were pretty different. We are having a lot of information right now, and everything is so fast. But in that moment, it was like you could put a question and you can have an answer like maybe a week later, and you never actually met the people you were talking with, because things were just different in the internet, by the way, but in those times. So by the time I discovered I needed myself to be fatter, all this internet world have already changed. So I could find a lot of information. I could talk with some other people who were in sync with me. Some of the communities were around by the time. So it helped me to accept this part of myself. So I decided I am a gainer in that moment. Like I already know the terms, I already know what it meant to be, but like in that moment in my life, I just notice it. I just like embrace it. You know what? I'm a gainer, and I need to be bigger and fatter, and that's not wrong. It's like a personal choice. So just do it, okay? And it became more conscious than the last time, because when I was a teenager, I did it, but it was like all sex drive. It was like I did it because it was hot. But now it's like a more central part of myself. So long story short, I passed through a lot of things through my life, and finally I decided to move to a bigger city, to feel like I was free enough to get as fat as I want. And I'm starting to do it again. I actually started my gaining journey again this year. So I've been from 89 kilos in January this year to 97 today. So I want to keep going, and I want to keep on gaining weight. And in all this time, I consider myself a feeder, because I really want people around me to get fat, and I really want other gainers to embrace it and feel good in their skin. One of my friends always said to me that I'm the biggest feeder he knows, because of my blog and because of my page. A lot of people became gainers, and that's pretty flattering. But I feel like when this is for you, you found it and you know it.
Yeah.
So I'm just proud of it, and I really want to have a community out here, and I really want to keep on going.
Wow. I mean, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And honestly, even as you started touching on all those different points, the horniness that you feel versus the lived reality of it, the decision to gain weight, the decision to potentially stop losing weight, and the different decisions and prioritizing different things and building community and all these points. Honestly, like half the back catalog can be referenced right then and there. Listeners, go listen to the things. And this is why we have such an expansive category of topics we talk about and delve into with the podcast, because even just with Ugo sharing, their experiences right here with us, there are so many moments there to just like hone in on, and you could blow that up and there's 1,000 questions and 1,000 decisions that get made, all to do with gaining and the experience of being fat and how it changes your life, both for the good and for the challenges. So listen to the words, and I think listen to the challenges Ugo has put aside. If this is for you, make it for you, do it for you, look at the things, do all the things that you need to do. I mean, Tim, to reference you here for a moment, as we said before, you've been around with the internet for a longer time than many of us. Like, how does Ugo's experiences of connecting with that early period of gainer community align with your experiences at that kind of time?
I mean, I identify with a lot of what Ugo was saying, especially when it came to when you mentioned that you have a high metabolism and that it's not easy for you to put on weight. One of my biggest problems, like even at 40, my metabolism is still going pretty strong. I keep hoping that like as soon as my 40th birthday hits, it'll just tank and I'll have no further problems, but that's not realistic. And then again, like early experiences with the internet and like feeling that you're alone until you find your community online. And I wish that we could meet gainers in real life before we start doing things online, but that's just not possible in the world we live in. Maybe like the alpha generation, maybe they'll be able to meet gainers in real life before they're able to do it online. But I lost my train of thought.
I mean, I wanted to ask real quick, Ugo, how old are you now?
I'm 35.
35, okay. So, similar, kind of in between Tim and myself, that similar millennial generation of discovering things when we're underage and desires. And for some people pursue that, and I think it would be really cool at some point in the future to do an episode like an underage gaining retrospective, like interview someone who like they got their start like when they were at home and when they were in high school and actually did the dang thing like we all wanted to do when we were teenagers, but didn't end up doing. So if any listeners out there fills that brief, and obviously is of consenting age, that should not have to be stated, but we're going to state that just to be very clear about this, then please reach out to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. We would love to have you on to have that conversation. But no, Ugo, thank you so much for sharing that experience, and it is wonderful to hear about other gainer journeys. I know we don't necessarily talk about people's personal journeys a lot on the podcast, but, I think it is important, especially when it comes to, as we come back to, people who aren't from the typical West, people who English is not their first language, and centering experiences that just aren't what we see every day. And I think it's wonderful to know that there is such a strong through line, such a similar correlation between how you discover and experience your gains to how we do, and I think that's a good point for a lot of people in the community to remember. There's more that what we have in common than what we don't, which should probably be a mantra about many, many, many other subjects happening in the world at the moment, just to put that out there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we as a community have all this in common, and even if we don't match our languages or we have different cultural backgrounds, we have all this in common, And a gainer is still a person, and as people, we share more similarities. But sometimes I don't know why we like to categorize everything, and we like to tear apart all this, but that's only an illusion, like every gainer in the world have this personal journey, then I'm pretty sure it's very similar, like we have all this in common, we have all this background, and sometimes we lose it all just because we have all this categorization, we are like dividing everything.
Albert Einstein says that the greatest illusion is, or the greatest lie, rather, is the illusion of separation. This idea that we introduce concepts like cooking and microbiology and the weather and sex and anime and any other number of subjects, and we think to ourselves, these are such wildly different things that could have no possible correlation to each other, but actually there's so much with everything that comes in common, and it's really important that we understand that we do have similarities, and we can also learn from different things and share in different things. And I don't know, I just think these types of moments are just really important because we don't see them enough. But I want to ask here, you were telling us that you've been doing the podcast for about 10 years now, is that right?
Yeah, more or less.
So what has the response been like from listeners of your podcast?
I think at the beginning, when I started to record the first podcast, I haven't a lot of response, at least not directly, because later on, when I met people by the web or in real life, they talk about my podcast like they were, I didn't know what was going on with me, but then I found this page, and then I hear this podcast, and I started to think, maybe I'm like him, So I discovered there's a difference among the response I thought I have in the podcast online versus the impact of it in real world. And that's pretty interesting because there's a difference between this kind of content with the one you put on some other social media, you can measure it through likes, through comments. And here is like a lot of people never comment about it, but they are like thinking a lot of it, and it's making like a difference in their lives, but they are not actually interacting with it. It's kind of funny, it's different. But I think it has been generally good. I even met some gainers who told me they discovered this community through my blog and my podcast, which makes me very happy. Most of them thought this kind of lifestyle was only for English speaking people, and then just discovered this. and I feel very happy because that's my main goal with it.
I feel like James and I have had a very similar experience, and I think overall, any product that is put out there into the Gainerverse is a very slow burn. It's like, think about all the websites that have come along and how long it took before they really reached their stride. Grommr's been around for 10 years, but right out the gate, it wasn't like the most popular site. It is now, but like there are other sites that are coming along that they're trying to grow in popularity, and everything does move slowly at first. Like, I think James and I, we we were a little naive in thinking the response was going to be swift, and it was not. It was the kind of thing that took many months.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think because when you want to create something, obviously you think to yourself, I'm passionate enough about this to create this. And if I'm this passionate, then surely there are other people out there who are that passionate. And the moment I press click and then the first episode posts, every gainer in the universe is going to find it and they're going to love it and they're going to celebrate it, and I'm going to get a Nobel Peace Prize. Like, we didn't think that. But
no.
like,
that's a little grandiose even for us.
Even for us. But like, you do have an idea in your head that like somehow it's like a beacon, right? Like, you see all those sci-fi space movies, you've got to press the beacon, it goes do 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 do, and it goes out into space. And sometimes the whole plot is like the beacon was launched 50 years ago and we just got our first message back. And then you think there are actually dozens and dozens of people whose whole job it is to like maintain that beacon the entire time. So it's like all of that just for like one ping back message. So actually it makes sense that there is this existing narrative that you are putting something out into the universe literally, and you are just waiting for someone to ping back, just waiting. And unlike aliens and whatever else that NASA fucking deals with, we have the blessing that human beings on our planet at least respond in a faster time frame than decades. Sometimes it's like weeks and months rather than expansive years. But I think that's actually a really good point for anyone listening who's considering doing their own thing, or maybe they are running their own thing and is wondering why they're not getting that kind of resonance from people. You can do all the marketing and promotion you want, but sometimes like it just takes time. And that's kind of the beginning and end of it. There's no caveats. Like sometimes I feel like we have conversations where we argue and we're looking for the excuse, oh, I didn't tick the box correctly, or oh, I missed a posting date or something like that. Nah, sometimes it's just shit takes time, and that's all there is to all there is to it. Um, but I did want to ask, you'd mentioned that some people listened to your podcast, and because they listened to your podcast, they discovered the gaming community. So I want to know, like, what kind of changes have you noticed in your gaming community since you started your podcast?
Well, the evolution have been impressive, actually. A lot of people in Spanish-speaking countries didn't even know something like the fittest communities could exist back in the day. Nowadays, we have a lot of gamers making content, social media, and even in other platforms like OnlyFans or so. And that would be totally, impossible in those times. People is being more, is having more freedom to talk about this, and we have a lot of information, even if we don't have a lot of in Spanish, though there is more information than back in the day, and the people is getting to communicate faster, and that's making the difference among the younger generations. There's a lot of people who is exploring this part of themselves, and they're not having this guilt feeling attached to it that we used to have when we were younger, because all of the context, because everything being so slow and having like so little information. And I think we're evolving in that, and that evolution have been impressive. I really think we are really constructing something here, especially about Latin America. Our communities are very small. We are not that structured now, but we are starting it. And you can see it. You can see there are small groups. You can see now a lot of feeders and gainers get in touch, which is the beginning of a community. So I really, really love to see this, and I'm pretty sure we are going to have a bigger community in the future. We're just getting started.
I love that. And I think that's wonderful to hear about the Latin community because, again, as Western folk, our engagement with that is so minimal, and it does feel like, like, yes, language barriers, but it also does feel like sometimes the structure of things keeps people very separate. And I do think to myself sometimes, like, what would the world be like if we just had a little bit more of like reaching out to people who were like more or less the same as us, just doing things a little bit differently. Speaking of which, El Gainer, like we talked about before very briefly, is not just a podcast. You also have a full-fledged website where you do articles and blog posts and things of that nature. Tell us a little bit more about that part of what you do.
Yes, I have a blog where you can find general info about the feederism and the gainer community. They have like the information from the definition of it to the things we want or like to do, to stories and experiences. I talk about my experiences and my friends, and you can read it in El Gainer. I have translated some articles from English, and even the ones on video, like the hard fat one, which I think is one of the best ones who are portraying like the gainer community in a good way. And that's it. Like it main goal is to be informative. Like I know you can be horny and just watch some video or try to read some erotica. But what I feel we're lacking of is information. So that's all. That's the main goal of all this project. And sometimes it's kind of difficult to find out like different things to talk about. But I don't know. I think like I just built this like little ecosystem where I can just put different kind of information and not only just translate it from English, but now we have a little community. Like we can talk about it and we can have our own experiences on that.
I think that's great. That's something that, admittedly, even with, the kind of social media stuff that Tim and I try to do, between TikTok and Instagram and our website, even we haven't really managed to kind of get it to grips on that. So I think that is to be commended. Again, things that we've kind of been fed back to in the past, because not everyone listens to the podcast and they don't have to. But, some people will say, podcasts just aren't my thing. But then there are other people who'll say, they want to consume this content, but they just don't gel with like an audio podcast medium. Some people really are readers. Some people, and even within reading, they want articles. Or if they don't want articles, they want short stories. And if they don't want short stories and essays, they want books and they want novels just filled to the brim with information. And they don't just want, novels that are kind of written in, down to earth terminology. They want it in, the scientific lay term and jargon and all of that. And every form of that informative consumption is valid. And I think it's wonderful that you're really branching out and doing that for the Spanish speaking community and for the Latin community. So, Tim, I think we need to get some writers and up our game on all this stuff,
I agree.
I do want to ask here, just as a curiosity, what kind of challenges have you encountered with El Gainer? Either like from the production side of things or like the reception from listeners. What kind of challenges have you encountered with it?
Well, as you know, the production of this product is really hard, to say the least. You have to earn a lot of time. And sometimes it's like really difficult. But I think my main problem here is in the community is growing. There's not a lot of people willing to be more out of the fridge and embrace it, like embrace this part of themselves. So I usually have a hard time finding people to talk with. And of course, the distances sometimes could be a problem since there's a wide area to cover here. And sometimes it could be a problem since we have the necessity to record remotely, and most of the time the internet connections here in Mexico are not the best, frankly. But I don't know. I think I could. By the time I learned to, keep calm and do it just because I like to do it and because I feel like this is doing well to the community. But yeah, I would be lying if I say it's an easy thing, because it's not. Like maybe you as a producer from this kind of content can relate with this. Sometimes you are like overwhelmed with all of the things you have to do, because people can just read an article or just hear 30 minutes of podcast, but there's a lot of work behind it, like there's more than you do behind the scenes.
Very much so. I mean, even just for this episode, we talked to Pablo and we were interviewing him, and then he mentions El Gainer and we go, oh, what's that? He tells us a bit about it. We say, great, let's do some research. And then we go to the website, which of course we are going to drop in the socials at the end of this episode, so everyone listen out for that. But we went to the website and we looked you up and we found you on Instagram, and we had to run the articles through English translators a bit, but we were looking at the kind of content that you post, and we took the time to research it, and like when we wrote out our brief with all the questions we're going to ask, it's an informed brief. It's not just us going, Hello, how are you today? So, do you want, do you like fat? Like, like we're asking real questions that, you know, we want to learn about something. And if we're gonna explore some deeper and, tricky subjects, we've got to ask challenging questions as well. So like it's all that research, and then you get to the episode and then you record it, and when you're done recording, you've got to edit it and you've got to put it up online, and it's everything else that goes into it. And I don't know. Tim, I said this to you the other week. Something I'm very passionate about is that the gainer community deserves quality. Not
Yes.
just any, not just like, oh, here is a thing, just have it. Like, give
Mhm.
me gilded with gold. I want it gold plated, and I want it served on a silver platter, and I want it done to the best of our abilities and the highest quality. Because when we create something that is immaculate, other people will turn around and pay attention. Other people will take it more seriously because they go, look at this professional product. They really care about what they're doing. This is the real deal. I want to listen. And when I learn something from this, I want to share it with other people, and I want to spread that message of positivity. So, it all, ironically, feeds back into the original thing, and it just keeps going and going and going from there. So
And it's interesting that we're in a position to be demanding quality at this point, because I remember when we just cared about quantity because there wasn't any of it. Like we really had to
Mhm.
scour to find things, and we only had like 2 websites and a bunch of Yahoo groups, and we were just like, just give me the quantity because I can't find my porn anywhere else. Like this, so just give me more and more. And now we're in a position where we kind of have a glut of the porn. Now we have so many people doing OnlyFans and so many people doing stuff on Twitter. So, like there's so many different platforms that we're spread across now. You can easily find your porn if you want to. So people are now more interested in, well, I've done the porn and yeah, it's great, but I'd like some quality here. I'd like something that I can actually chew on,
Yeah.
and yeah, and that's we're in now a position to be giving that. So, that's why we stress so much over the quality of the product.
And honestly, why we are constantly putting out probes on our episodes, that we want more people, and we want more diverse people, and we want people with unique experiences, because they're out there, and you're listening to this episode right now, hearing our voices, and we're telling you we want you because we want to celebrate you and lift you up. So find us in the right places. Let's talk and let's keep things building. And if you are Spanish speaking, hit up Ugo and be a part of El Gainer, and talk about those experiences, and let's just keep this all going. It's fabulous. Let's keep it all going. And I want to ask you here, like, what do you want out of the future of El Gainer? Like, do you have a specific goal in mind of like things you want to do, projects you want to start working on? Tell us about that.
Well, the first one is that I want to make it more professional, like having a higher quality audio in my podcast, like having a team who is helping me to research, to make more content, because sometimes, because it is just me, it's difficult to do it, like I have a lot of help from my friends, but it's not the same like having a team who is working with you. And I just want more people to know about the gainer lifestyle, and I wish I could be this could become a platform against the fat phobia, because we are having so much of it right now. I'm not sure if the federation could be ever been celebrated, you know, by the rest of the world, but at least it must be tolerated by those who doesn't like it. And I think information is the key to achieve that, And of course, as you said, we are not in those times like we have a lot of quantity, because we already have a lot of quantity of all information. Right now, we have the quality of it, like having this um, this info who is is having an impact on us. So I don't know. I just want to make it sound more professional to express better, like what the community is, like making it sound serious, like making it sound like we are a real community, and we're not just a fetish, and we're just not like a lot of horny people.
I think that's great. I think we've said similar things. As much as we are very accustomed as community members to talk like this with our dicks in our hands, and we're very good at the horny, but what about the social? What about the platonic, the intellectual, the spiritual, the all of it, like where are those conversations? And that's where this podcast comes in. That's where Elgainer comes in. And like we've been saying, it's all about building it up. And it just makes me so happy that we're not the only ones out there doing that there are people like yourself representing and making it happen. We do have a listener question here, which is, what is the most important thing you've learned from doing Elgainer?
Okay, first one, I learned that liking being fat or wanting to gain weight is not that uncommon among the general population. But most of the people, especially here, doesn't have a name for it, And once they know, they feel better about it, and knowing there's more people like them, they can encourage themselves to be their true self. You can encourage a gainer or a feeder to being their true self through the information, through having community, and that's priceless. So I learned that knowledge is power. Is just not a cliche. Like the more you know, the more you do, and even if we are always thinking that we are a minority, we are not like 3 people. We are a bigger community. It's just like a lot of people just don't even know this could exist, and that was a shock to me, because when I first started all this project, and especially when I was younger, I don't know, I have this thing of thinking that I was the only one around the world thinking about this thing, like who else in the world would want to get fatter or like fat, and to know that I'm not the only one, and there's a lot of people thinking like me, open up a world of totally different options to me, and I think to discover this is not only an individual experience, but most of the people have it, is just amazing. And yeah, I learned that knowledge is power is just not a cliche, is a real thing.
I think that's great. And learning that we've got so much influence, I think, to change the world around us by just making little choices like that. I think that's a really important point for all of us to remember. Like, you don't have to go out and create a product to have a gainer influence on the people around you. I think just living your life as a fat person, or as a person becoming fat, with joy challenges people on their narratives around fatness. I mean, this gets talked about in fat lib spaces all the time. Like, someone will say to you inevitably, "Don't you feel bad about being fat? Shouldn't you lose some weight?" Something along those lines. And even just standing your ground and saying, "No, I'm kind of happy as is," will often stop people in their tracks, and they go, oh, well,
Totally.
okay. Like, they just think that you're unhappy because they don't know any other realities. So if you show them something different, they will learn something different. And I just want to close out here with a final question to the listeners of this podcast. What do you want them to know about you, about Elgainer? What's a request you want to make of our listeners today?
Well, I just want to say, listen to the podcast. Listen to the podcast if you can. Make your comments and follow Elgainer. I think there's a lot of people who doesn't have enough info about it. And if you spread the word, we're gonna be like a more informed community. Because as I said, to be a gainer should be a really informed decision, because we have a lot of idealization of what being a gainer is. So you people are the reason why all this exists. Like I'm just like you. I want the people to know about it, and that's my motivation to keep it going on with it. So that's it. Just try to make a look on it in elgainer.com.
That's wonderful. Well, listen, Ugo, that brings us to the end of this week's episode, but thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story. Thank you. Just thank you.
Thank you, guys. I have just an amazing time with you. And, I think that the work you're doing here with your podcast is just amazing. I know how much love it takes to do something like this. So I really appreciate it. And even if I'm not like the best of expressing myself in English, I know that there's a lot of people there that is actually enjoying this and having a lot of information because of you guys. So thank you guys.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. But of course, as we've been saying all along, if you speak Spanish, if you are someone who can lean into what Ugo is doing with El Gainer, please check out the El Gainer podcast. Now, where can people find El Gainer and the El Gainer podcast online, Ugo?
All right. We have a main webpage where you can find us all around. Is www.elgainer.com. And from there you can find out all the podcasts, all the articles, and all of the media we are making. So you can use that as a launch pad, and you can just explore it. Like it's our main page.
And Ugo, where can listeners find you online?
Okay, you can find me in almost every platform as Ugo Hunter or Hunter to Gainer. That's like I'm in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I use more platforms than other. Because I don't know. I think at the beginning of this, I thought I was stuck like with the millennial stuff, but I'm trying to explore different things.
You and me both, girl. Trying to figure out the TikToks and the new technology. It's a journey, but we are getting there. But that is a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BeefyFrat at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and BeefyFrat at ThiccyMouse. You can also look us up on Instagram and TikTok at Thicc Radio or at our website at www.podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note, you can reach us at podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Thicc Radio/message. And if you have any questions or ideas for episodes, you can reach us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats. Thank you.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Enter app podcast produced by Stan and Thicky Mouse.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Logitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify.